Tune into Nice Radio every Saturday at 7:30 a.m. for A View from the Outside, hosted by Brereton Horne. A View from the Outside takes a look at key issues affecting St Vincent and the Grenadines and gives a global perspective on how these issues are viewed. Host Brereton Horne will examine a variety of topics to enlighten, stimulate debate, and explore solutions. Hear the facts, hear the real-life stories, hear A View from the Outside. Join Brereton Horne at 7:30 a.m. every Saturday on Nice Radio for A View from the Outside.
This society needs a spectacle. It might help us to see some people.
On A View from the Outside this week being the 31st of July 2021, we repeat the call which we made on this program on the 4th of June 2016 and again on the 20th of June 2020 when we look at justice, 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 with the view being that it is necessary for Vincentians to galvanise and intensify the call for justice in all of its forms, including criminal justice, social justice, and otherwise, on behalf of all Vincentians. The Collins Dictionary defines justice as fairness in the way people are treated, and the Oxford Dictionary states that justice is the quality of being fair and reasonable. Those definitions tell us that justice is to treat people fairly, not some people, but people, meaning all people. The definitions also tell us that justice is the quality of being fair to all, and justice is the quality of reasonableness or being reasonable to all. We repeat this call for justice because there are now simply too many instances of injustice in the country. We make the call because without justice, there is always a risk of society collapsing altogether. In our repeat call for justice, we encourage Vincentians to call upon the Prime Minister of the country and the rest of his regime to stop the injustice which is being meted out to some Vincentians in the society. In a letter dated the 1st of August 2020, 1 year ago tomorrow, the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dr. Ralph E. Gonsalves, wrote to His Excellency Juan Orlando Hernandez, the President of the Republic of Honduras. In that letter, Dr. Gonsalves wrote to the President of Honduras demanding justice pertaining to the kidnapping of 5 Garifuna men in Honduras. In the penultimate paragraph of his letter, Dr. Gonsalves exclaimed to the President of Honduras that, quote, justice must be done, exclamation mark, unquote. He did not stop there. In another letter dated the 6th of August 2020, he wrote to His Excellency Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, and he copied the letter of the 1st of August to him. In that letter, he, Dr. Gonsalves, asked Mr. Guterres to look into the United Nations taking possible action regarding the situation in Honduras. Incidentally, he, Dr. Gonsalves, also pointed out that there is simply too much injustice done to ethnic minorities and disadvantaged people in the world. Ironically, however, he mentioned nothing about the injustice which his regime continues to mete out to the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines since they took government over 20 years ago. In much the same way that Dr. Gonsalves demanded justice be done pertaining to the 5 Garifuna men in Honduras, he must be reminded that justice must be done pertaining to all in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. He must be reminded of that. And you, the people, have to make that call and remind him. Make the call for justice pertaining to Cornelius John, the businessman of Diamond, who said his home was invaded by Ashel Morgan, a government senator and deputy speaker of the House of Assembly, and 2 men, one of whom has been named as the Assistant Director of Public Prosecutions, Kareem Nelson. He, Mr. John, said that he was beaten, threatened, and shot in the peace and tranquility of his home. Make the call for justice for him, for Mr. John, because the same Dr. Gonsalves who calls for justice, or who called for justice in Honduras just a year ago, has been accused of trying to meddle and interfere with justice in this matter. Make the call for justice for Mr. John, because the same Dr. Gonsalves who called for justice to be done in Honduras said publicly that Senator Ashel Morgan called him when the incident occurred and told him about it. It is he, Dr. Gonsalves, who commanded Vincentians to keep your mouth shut about the matter. Make the call for justice for Cornelius John, because it was only after an outcry that charges were laid against the alleged perpetrators. Make the call for justice in the face of what seems like an inadequacy of charges against the perpetrators. Make the call for justice in what seems like undercharging. Make the call for justice for Bigger Biggs. Bigger Biggs' own cry for justice continues unabated. Join him in his cry for justice. His cry and his call for justice cannot be repeated often enough. He deserves justice. For almost a decade now, his multi-million-dollar business was destroyed and left in ruins, and he remains without compensation. All because it is said that he is not a supporter of the Ralph Gonsalves regime. Demand justice for the estate of the former Commissioner of Police, Randolph Toussaint, as he continues to cry out for justice from the grave. Demand justice for Simone Murray and her husband, Dr. Wayne Murray, and their family. Demand justice for the former landowners at Argyle, who still remain unpaid after their lands were compulsorily acquired to construct the airport. Make the call for justice for Marcus de Freitas. He needs to be paid for his property, which the regime compulsorily acquired a decade and a half now, and for which the court ordered that he be paid. Marcus de Freitas deserves justice, and Dr. Gonsalves knows it, because he, when he felt the pressures of the last general elections in the country, he made a promise to have money put into the treasury for Marcus de Freitas. But up to now, nothing. Come on, justice must be done for this man. Demand justice for all the women and girls who have been defiled, abused, and denigrated by members of the regime, as well as their agents and enablers. Demand justice for the youths and others of the country who are socially deprived and depraved. Demand justice for the policemen and women who are being victimized, particularly by transferring them and or not promoting them. They demand justice. Demand justice for other public servants who are inexplicably overlooked for promotion and who are victimized in other ways. They deserve justice. Demand justice for protesters who are abused and victimized because they protest and who themselves are calling for justice for all in the country. Vincentians, make the call for justice. Demand it. Demand accountability now more than ever before. Demand to know where the $95 million that the Director of Audit said is missing have gone. Now is not the time to sit back in silence. Demand justice from the regime. Demand to know why Vincentians are living in extreme poverty, the Prime Minister's own words to the United Nations and the world, while up to 2015, according to the Director of Audit, $95 million are missing from the accounts of the country. Demand to know who all of the millions of dollars revealed in the Panama Papers belong to. Demand to know what happened to the purported investigation of allegations of millions of US dollars held in bank accounts overseas by those in the regime. Demand justice about that. Because when a few around you are visibly growing richer and richer, and they are flaunting their wealth in your faces, many around you are living in extreme poverty. Make the call for justice. Make it louder in relation to the millions of dollars in donations received for relief and rehabilitation after the damage and displacement caused by the eruption of La Soufrière. Call for justice for those affected and in need. Call for justice that they receive the assistance. Call for accountability of those funds. Remind the regime that justice must not only be done, it must be seen to be done. Help the Rastas, the traditional cannabis, marijuana, ganja farmers. Help them to make the call for justice. Make the call for justice for them, because much was promised to them, but to date, very little or nothing has been received by them. Vincentians, the struggle for justice is real for many in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And because it is real, it must not be ignored. Those in the leadership of the country must not be allowed to ignore or get away with the repeated injustice. This is a call for every Vincentian of conscience to make. No conscionable Vincentian can afford to sit idly by and watch and hear other Vincentians cry out for justice and not join in that cry. When some do not get justice, it should disturb and disrupt the peace of mind of others. When some do not get justice, their cries must be echoed and repeated as often as possible and as often as necessary by all. Those responsible for dispensing justice must not be allowed to rest until they fulfill their duty, their obligations to ensure that all get justice. After all, when one is denied justice, all in some way is denied justice. Also, it is clear that the call for justice for all in St. Vincent and the Grenadines is needed now more than ever. Do not let up. Let the Prime Minister and his regime know that nothing less than justice for all will do. Remind him of his own words, and I quote, "Justice must be done." Let him know that justice must be done in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, because justice in Honduras is no different from justice in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Repeat the words to him that justice must not only be done, but it must be seen to be done. Call him out with the same gusto and glee that he wrote to the President of Honduras and the Secretary General of the United Nations. Write to the United Nations as Dr. Gonsalves himself did. Write to CARICOM. Write to the OECS. Write to the OAS. Write to the Commonwealth. Write to all of the regional and international organizations, highlighting to them and informing them of the injustice taking place in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And at the same time, request of them their assistance in trying to bring about justice in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. As you do that, as we all do that, as we all make the call for justice, let us bear in mind the words of the late American civil rights activist Malcolm X, who said, and I quote, "I am for justice, no matter who it is for or against." Unquote. Until next week, Justin and all of the listeners, this is Brereton Horne with a view from the outside, with a reminder to send your feedback as usual to aviewfromtheoutside@hotmail.com. We also invite you to visit and like our Facebook page at A View From The Outside, and also to visit and subscribe to our YouTube channel at JMB Horne. Have a pleasant Saturday, have a wonderful Sunday, and a productive week ahead, with everyone making the call for justice on behalf of all Vincentians.